I met Guillermo del Toro a number of years before he got involved with the Blade franchise. We had a mutual friend, Stuart Kornfeld, who's a producer. I was a huge fan of Kronos, and I knew Guillermo throughout Mimic. He was really disheartened after that experience, and very unfairly, he had been kind of maligned in Hollywood's eyes and taken the brunt for, I guess, the perceived failure of that film. We really still believed in him as an artist and a filmmaker, but he was kind of in movie jail after Mimic. It's 10 years after the film, and obviously Guillermo has become this incredibly celebrated filmmaker now, and he's got the clout in Hollywood to do pretty much anything he wants to do. It was ironic because the week after the first Blade came out, Michael DeLuca called me and said, start writing a sequel. So I thought about it for a minute, and I said, well, I think since Blade hates vampires, what we should do for the sequel is have him have to team up with vampires to go against something worse. That just seems like a logical thing, and I said, let's do a Dirty Dozen, where Blade has to lead, effectively, a group of vampires against a mutual threat. And I remember I showed the first draft to Stuart Kornfeld, and he said, you should have Guillermo direct this. I talked to Peter Frankfurt, the producer, and he liked the idea as well. Sent it to Guillermo. Guillermo said, I love it, but, you know, I don't want to do a sequel. He said, I want to do this movie Devil's Backbone. I think he really felt burnt by Hollywood. And New Line was reticent as well, because again, at the time, Guillermo was really in movie jail because of Mimic. And Guillermo really wanted to make Hellboy. And I said to Guillermo, and I really do believe this, I said, right now, nobody's gonna let you make Hellboy. But if you do this movie Blade, and it's successful, they'll let you make Hellboy. They'll let you'll be a made man. You'll be able to make whatever you want to make, and you know, you can make it your own. And I think Guillermo was afraid at the time of suborning himself to a franchise, and that he wouldn't be allowed to bring himself to it. Ultimately, he got over those fears, and he came on board. And I believe he came on board in between the first and the second draft. And then we decided that I would go to Austin for 4 or 5 weeks and just live there and work with Guillermo on the script.
Get you later.
In Austin, we met daily. We had an initial couple of weeks, I believe, where we just watched things. You know, he would give me things to read and just spitball ideas and not get too specific. Guillermo would, you know, write down some things and say, what about this? And it was definitely this free-flowing back and forth.
Vampirism is an arbovirus. Like cancer.
Guillermo is definitely a sort of human encyclopedia of vampire myth and lore and fairy tales in general. Not to be boastful, but as am I. So there, between the two of us, there was often a kind of like, can you top this? Or can I cite a vague, random influence that you haven't heard of or whatnot? Because certainly in the comic book world, I don't think there was anything that Guillermo and I weren't aware of. And then the agreement was I continued writing and Guillermo went off to shoot Devil's Backbone.
Who do you think God really favors in the web? The spider or the fly?
There was a lot of cross-pollination going on between Devil's Backbone and Blade 2, and I'm sure some of the ideas from Devil's Backbone seeped into Blade 2. I know specifically the Devil's Backbone, there were those little jars in the movie with the deformed children, and that led, I know specifically, to Guillermo talking about these little vampire fetuses that Damaskinos has, you know, that he introduces later on in the film, the kind of ultimate vampire Superman, Nietzschean super race that I know for a fact that that was a bit of cross-pollination between the two.
Begotten from my own flesh, immune to silver, soon even sunlight.
Guillermo gave the second Blade film a real sense of poetry. Blade 2 is a much more sentimental film. Certainly as it relates to his relationship with Whistler,
Let's go.
As it relates to Blade's relationship with Nyssa, you know, at the end as he's carrying her out into the sun and she turns to ash in his arms. I know in the first draft, the Nomad character had actually been genetically bred from Blade's own genetic material. So he wasn't the Damaskinos' son, he was actually Blade's genetic brother, or kind of reverse clone, or whatever you wanted to call it. And that was a change that Guillermo wanted to make, which we argue quite a lot about. I still think it might have been interesting to have Blade kill his brother in a way. Guillermo really liked the idea that Damaskinos had genetically modified his own son, and there is this sort of Shakespearean quality to that film that is very much Guillermo.
I want to die while I'm still a vampire.
Blade 2 feels like a Blade film, but it also feels like a Guillermo del Toro film. It's got the amber and red color palette. It's got the grotesqueries, it's got the idiosyncrasies. He obviously expanded the mythology with the Reapers. I mean, and ultimately the Reapers, the way they work, the way they move, the way the Maw works, was something that very much came from Guillermo. In the first draft, the Reapers had mouths in their hands. They had kind of like these sort of sucker things in their hands instead of this sort of thing that would flange open. And fair enough, Guillermo said, I just don't believe the biology of that. It looks cool, but I don't believe the biology of that. He loves organic design. I know that he likes curved lines much more than straight lines. Norrington likes straight lines. If you look at a lot of the set design in the first Blade film as compared to the second Blade film, there's a lot more arches. Whether or not he's ever specifically expressed this or not, he likes tapping into these sort of archetypal shapes and images that people find primal and scary and or alluring. He very much likes tapping into the unconscious and the subconscious. And he very much is enamored with curved lines and machinery and artificial implements that are evocative of organic shapes. That's just something that you would have to ask Guillermo and what particular perversion he experienced when he was a child as to why that happens, but it's evident in all of his films. I think the Blade films are the first modern superhero films, and I also believe that the Blade films were the first comic book films that weren't specifically citing comic book palettes, primary colors, you know, red, yellow, blue, that the sensibility had to be very biff bang pow, that the score had to be very John Williams. Most people in Hollywood looked down on comic books. Obviously, we had a love for them, and so we weren't apologetic about our love for them.
You're about to enter our world. You will see things. Feeding. Just remember why you're here.
I haven't forgotten.
Guillermo, even more than Norrington, is completely unapologetic of his love for pulp, of his love for comic books, of his love for horror films, and he sort of, you know, wears that badge proudly. I think those films were the first films that really took themselves and the subject matter completely seriously. And I think if you look at the other films that followed, whether it be the X-Men films, or the Spider-Man films, certainly Batman Begins, and the upcoming Superman movie that we're doing, there's not really a wink and a nudge to the audience. And even as much as I love the first Donner Superman, the depiction of Lex Luthor, for instance, there's definitely a wink and a nudge, you know. There wasn't a wink and a nudge, really, in the Blade films. They were scary, they were violent, they were visceral, they were R-rated. And Guillermo certainly pushed a lot of that even further than the first film.
Daywalker.